Hey guys, it's VillainTheory, and today we're talking all about my favorite Iron Man decks. Iron Man's a super interesting hero. In hero form, at the start of the game, he has a hand size of 1, but you can increase this by playing tech upgrades. So typically, you want to stay Ultra Ego for a couple of turns, playing as many tech upgrades as you can, and typically that's how you want to deck build, adding as many in as possible to some extent. And then you flip down, and you actually have a usable hand size, and you dominate the game. His late game is super strong. Early game, one of the weakest in the entire game, but few turns in, he's a complete juggernaut, so very, very strong. So really high damage, threat removal. He just has so many cards once you've got that hand size up to 7, which is the maximum, but you just got to get there. If you can get there, you typically have won the game. So that's what all of these decks will focus on today. Really strong early games, and then late game, we just kind of assume we're going to win anyway. Although if we can increase it, obviously that's even better. And there's a few things I want to talk about. First of all, these cards. These cards are not in any of the decks I'm showing today. These cards, particularly in solo play, are absolutely incredible cards for Iron Man, but the Justice 2, I think, are kind of boring, so they don't make my favorite decks. But if I was playing him against someone like Rhino, someone with a low threat threshold, I would definitely be including these for solo play. So these are really good cards for him that you might want to add into the Justice deck that's coming up in a bit, but not my favorite cards, don't make my favorite decks. Professor X is a really good card, but I use him a lot, and it just didn't quite make the cut for these decks. Although, again, for power, you probably do want to include him, at least in some of these. So after that, there's another ally with a mental resource from the basic kind of aspect that we need to talk about, and that's Moon Girl. I've stopped using Moon Girl very much in Iron Man. I kind of feel that she is a late game card, and I feel like Iron Man doesn't need the late game help. And to explain this, a lot of the tech cards are energy resources, whereas Moon Girl here wants mental resources. And Repulsor Blast exists, which wants you to discard energy resources, which is a long way of saying Iron Man wants to include lots of energy resources in his deck, which makes a card like Moon Girl, which wants multiple mental resources, much more inconsistent. And we do have Ingenuity, we do have Quinn Carrier, these generate wild resources, which make Moon Girl super consistent. But in a character that likes to discard a lot with, Futurist, with Repulsor Blast, and maybe some other cards we're including in some of these decks. So basically, long story short, I cannot guarantee in the first deck pass I'm getting one or even either of these in play. I probably am, but I might not be. And that just makes Moon Girl very inconsistent. And I don't typically want to use a deck space for something that's going to be typically kind of inconsistent and only going to be helpful in the late game when my late game is already very, very powerful. Now, you can build a deck that is more around mental resources and actually still do extremely well with Iron Man. And in that kind of deck, Moon Girl is very, very good. But I've just kind of stopped using her with Iron Man, and I haven't really regretted it. So that's where I stand on that. And lastly, I want to talk about these new cards, Digging Deep and White Fox, that came with Domino. Very, very fun cards. If they're discarded from the top of your deck, you get a benefit. Digging Deep enters your hand. Effectively, you get +1 resource that turn. White Fox enters play as an ally, which is absurd, and she has the energy resource at the bottom, so she is very, very good for Iron Man. Now, Meditation was actually one of my favorite cards for Iron Man before these cards came out, but now I feel they're at war, and this is because too many resource cards makes Iron Man sad in the late game, and it's not too big of a deal because kind of like I'm saying, once you get to the late game, you're generally winning anyway. But here's the thing, you are always bringing the free double resources, the regular one, Strength, Energy, Genius, mainly because Pepper Potts can generate 2 resources from them, but also mainly because they're super good cards in general. Adding 3 copies of Digging Deep, you're now at 6 resource cards. Meditation is effectively a resource card in everything but name, and long story short, if you're bringing 3 meditations, 3 digging deeps, and the 3 basic, double resources, that's 9 resource cards, which isn't the end of the world, especially for a character with a big hand size like Iron Man. But Iron Man thins out his board because he's playing so many upgrades. So you end up with 9 resources in rotation, and sometimes not a lot of events and allies and things like that. So your hands start to get dominated by these resources that you don't really have places to spend, unless you then build in resource sinks, but then you're having to take extra steps in a character that already has, relatively tight deck space, in my opinion. So it's a bit of a tricky conundrum, but these decks, at least a couple of them, I've been trying to work on combining Digging Deep and Meditation in the best way. Generally, I find that if you do include both to some extent, then you're strengthening that early game, you're getting set up faster because you've got more resources early on, and then you get to that late game and you're basically winning anyway. So that is kind of the strategy here, but it is worth noting that it's very easy to have too many resources with Iron Man if you go for both of these. So without further ado, let's get into the actual decks themselves. Up first, we have Digging with Domino and Deathlock, and this is a leadership deck, which I've heard some people say is not, that good for Iron Man, and it is good for Iron Man. Now, maybe it's not as natural a fit as Protection, which we will get to a Protection deck, but I've really been enjoying the new cards in leadership for Iron Man. Now, we've got superpower training and call for backup, which we'll talk about. Those are side schemes. Those are very interesting for Iron Man. But we've also got Deathlock and Domino as the deck is named after. We're also using Digging Deep and White Fox, as we talked about before here. And we've got 3 plasma pistols, just because that is a tech card. Iron Man loves tech. But let's talk about what this deck is really based around. So Domino was a hero who introduced the Digging Deep and White Fox cards in her sort of precon. And the ally works a little bit like she does. She's really good with those cards. So the Domino ally, after you use one of the basic powers from it, you get to swap a card in your hand with the top of your deck. That means that if you have, Digging Deep in hand, you can use Domino to put it on top of your deck, get another card into hand. And I didn't really explain this when we talked about Digging Deep, but the reason that card and White Fox are so good for Iron Man is that not only does Repulsor Blast discard from the top of his deck, but so does his Ultra Ego Futurist ability. So you will have multiple ways to, if you've put a good card to discard on top of your deck, discard it. So Domino and Digging Deep work really well in that regard. Putting White Fox on top of your deck can increase Repulsor Blast damage and get you an ally. Just really, really good. Then we've got Deathlock, and Deathlock's hero response is after he enters play, choose an upgrade in any player's discard pile with a cost of 1 or less and attach it to him. And you can use this with Reinforced Suit, which is a tech card, so this is increasing our hero hand size. And you might be thinking, wow, Deathlock's really expensive to set up one piece of tech, and you're right, but he would also be an ally with 5 health at that point and 2 forwarding to attack, which makes him very flexible and gives him a lot of uses. And this is actually no more inefficient, or should I say expensive, than a 2-cost ally. So let's say I have a hand size of 5 on a regular hero, just as an example here. You can say, declare you're going to play your 2-cost ally, spend 2 resources on that ally. Now you've got your 2-cost ally in play. Then you've got Reinforced Suit, which you can start to play, spend 1 resource on it. It's 5 effective resources to get a 2-cost ally with Reinforced Suit then put onto them. So the advantage of Deathlock over any old 2-cost ally is that I can use Meditation to get Deathlock in for effectively cheaper. I don't need Reinforced Suit to be in the same hand to, start playing an ally and getting value from my tech card being on that ally to get increased hand size, if that makes sense. And also, Deathlock has better stats than most 2-cost allies, which makes it very efficient to then boost his stats with Reinforced Suit. So I just think it works out really well and is really, really fun. Then we've got the player side schemes, and they are very good for Iron Man. Superpower training is in a couple of decks in this video, and when you defeat it, you get to search for an identity-specific upgrade. For Iron Man, that's going to be tech, so defeating this gets you another tech card in play. So if you want to flip down to hero form, but you think, I don't have quite enough tech to get a good hand size when I'm there, well, if you have superpower training in hand, play that, forward it down, which Iron Man has pretty good forwarding. If you have your helmet or arc reactor or any ally in combination with Iron Man, you can absolutely take this out in solo play, no problem. You can then get an extra piece of tech from superpower training being defeated. So this is really good. Then we've got call for backup, which is effectively the same thing because we've got Deathlock. So call for backup when defeated gets you any ally from your deck or discard pile put into play. When we put Deathlock into play, we get to attach tech to him. So by defeating call for backup, we're also increasing our hero hand size, and we're also getting a very juicy ally from it. So really, I think both of these cards are very, very good for almost any leadership Iron Man deck. Honestly, a lot of decks in general in the game. And that really does it for the first deck. Now, I should say all the allies are 3 cost or more to make sure Meditation has plenty of targets. There are only 2 copies of Meditation to make sure we don't get too many resources flooding our hands in the late game. And also, we've got lots of allies instead of, let's say, more upgrades or supports, just so we have more things in rotation as well, so we're not getting flooded with those resources again. And a lot of them have energy resources, which is very good for Repulsor Blast, so we do want to keep them kind of in rotation. And yeah, I've had a lot of fun with this deck. I think it works really well. Next up, we have what is perhaps the most famous deck for Iron Man these days, which is Repurpose. It's just protection gets all the tech cards. There's even a tech card called Electrostatic Armor, which I didn't include here, but a lot of people still do include it with Iron Man. I think that would be a very good choice if you did. But long story short, protection has 3 different tech cards, which you can take 3 copies of each, which all have the energy resource, which is really what he wants. Then we've got Repurpose, which works with tech cards, which just works super, super well with Iron Man. And that's the deck. Then you just throw in as many other kind of energy or good kind of efficient cards around it as you like, and you go, and you typically win. If you look at the kind of energy ratio I've got on the screen here, lots more energy cards than everything else, even more than the previous deck. Your Repulsor Blast hit like a truck with this kind of deck. Everything in protection loves energy resources, so it's just really, really good for Iron Man in that regard, but you do need the tech cards to make it work. So we've got Energy Barrier, which is a 2-cost tech card. Force Field Generator is a 3-cost tech card. These both prevent the damage you take. Energy Barrier lets you reflect it a bit. Force Field Generator protects you from more. But Force Field Generator isn't sort of usable at will. It is a forced interrupt, so you have to use it. Whereas Energy Barrier, you can choose to use it. Which means you can get it down to 1 counter and keep it around. Whereas Force Field Generator tends to leave before you might want it to, because these cards combo with repurpose, which we'll talk about soon. However, Defiance works really well with Force Field Generator. Defiance cancels the boost card on the enemy. It basically blanks that boost card that the enemy would get. That's effectively the result, which means that Force Field Generator typically survives at least one hit. But if you've already taken one hit on it, you can calculate, how much damage is a villain going to do exactly looking at their attack stat. Use Defiance if it's in your hand, keep Force Field Generator around maybe for a second hit, and then repurpose it, which is really, really good. Then we've got Repurpose. This is the card that is one of my favorites in the entire game. 0-cost event, discard a tech, upgrade you control, ready your hero, choose a stat. Until the end of the round, you get a boost to that stat equal to the cost of the tech card you just discarded. So long story short, if I'm Iron Man and I've got an attack stat of 1, but I use Repurpose to discard an energy barrier, I ready my character, my attack stat is now 3, and I can use that attack stat for the whole turn. Why that matters is because if you have more ways to ready up, such as Iron Man's Arc Reactor, as you can see on the screen here, you get to use that boost to your stats again. And generally, you would never choose defense with this, but choosing forwarding is really good in multiplayer, and maybe in an emergency in solo play, but choosing attack is really, really good. And if you have multiple repurposes in hand, which is very possible because Iron Man fins out his deck and he has a 7-card hand size, you can actually repurpose 2 different tech cards, stacking the bonuses, getting the readies sort of staggered and using those big stats multiple times, which is just incredibly powerful. Now, I've got Machine Man in here as well. Machine Man is a really convenient resource sink, which is to say, if you have too many resources, just spend them on Machine Man's Interrupt, which gives him a boost to his stats, 1 for each resource. And it's not the most efficient, but it's super flexible. You can use it multiple times, and I think Iron Man really appreciates his presence, and that's basically the deck. Tons of energies for Repulsor Blast, loads of tech cards for Iron Man himself and Repurpose. Repurpose, of course, here being amazing, and then we just filled in around that. Then we have Float Like an Iron Man, and I would say, especially for solo play, most of the most powerful Iron Man decks are typically running stuff like one way or another. Maybe they're running a couple more Plasma Pistols, things like that, just to get that tech early on. But I've really enjoyed this deck, which is built around Float Like a Butterfly, which is where the name comes from, obviously, but does not need Float Like a Butterfly at all to be in play to win. There have been games where, because Iron Man discards a lot, I've not managed to get Float Like a Butterfly in play at all, and I still absolutely dominated the game and won with this. And if you can get Float Like a Butterfly in, then everything is even better. The Sonic Rifle is a free cost upgrade that when you exhaust it, you get to spend one of its 2 charges and you get to confuse an enemy. And this is really good with its cost because you can meditate it, but it's also really good because it's a on-demand confuse, and you can kind of bank 2 confuses to use them consecutively, consistently, and that's very, very fun. And then we've got Float Like a Butterfly, which is a 2-cost upgrade. When this is on the board, when any character you control attacks, which includes your allies as well as your hero, you get to increase that damage by 1 if the enemy is confused, which is really good. We're running quite a few allies in this deck as well, and we've got Powered Gauntlets. We have 2 Powered Gauntlets in any Iron Man deck. It's one of his signature cards. Exhaust it to deal damage. If you're aerial, it's dealing 2 damage, but if the enemy's confused as well, then you're dealing 3 damage with both of them. So that's kind of 6 damage per turn if the enemy's confused, if your Powered Gauntlets out, which is very, very good. More if Iron Man attacks, more if your allies attack. So once Float Like a Butterfly is out and you have, kind of your Sonic Rifles, which will be cycling constantly, usually with this kind of deck, you'll be kind of confused locking the villain in a way, and you'll start to just destroy the villain. They'll start to get disintegrated. This can happen even more if you get Specialized Training out. Now, in Justice, we can take this out pretty easily, and we could choose Combat Specialist, which bumps Iron Man's basic attack stat up to 2, but we also get card draw from it, which is really good in general. But we have readies with Arc Reactor, which means we can attack with 2, then attack with 2. And then we can include Float Like a Butterfly's damage. And we can be basic attacking for free, readying up with Arc Reactor, basic attacking for free. Then with our Powered Gauntlets, attacking for 3 more, attacking for 3 more. So all we need is Combat Specialist, Arc Reactor, Float Like a Butterfly, and our 2 Powered Gauntlets, which might sound like a lot, but Iron Man builds up his board pretty quick once he gets going, and we're getting 12 damage a turn on the villain as long as they're confused. You can just play a super, super controlled game, and then the villain will just melt because you have all this damage coming in. Now, if you take this deck to 2-player, I would include Heroic Intuition and instead go for Surveillance Specialist. Then you can fort for 4, ready up with Arc Reactor, fort for 4, just incredibly good. Play Float Like a Butterfly, maybe on yourself still for those Powered Gauntlets, but hey, maybe put it on your aggression player, no problem, or maybe bring some more copies of it because Iron Man can afford to play them. I wouldn't take this deck into 3 or 4 player. It's just not built for that level of threat removal. Threat removal just scales up a lot more per player than anything else in the game. And the other decks, I should say, I think you can play them at any player count. They are sort of built for solo, but 2, 3, 4 player, they'll probably actually do better there just because it gives Iron Man more sort of lenience on the main scheme to set up and then destroy everything. And lastly, for the Float Like an Iron Man deck, I need to talk more about the allies. Yes, we have a lot of them to make sure we have multiple damage sources for Float Like a Butterfly, but Cypher, who came with Psylocke's pack, which is where Float Like a Butterfly comes from, is particularly good with Float Like a Butterfly because it means he gets an extra damage when he attacks a confused enemy. Attacking a confused enemy gets to draw you a card. Card draw is good. Then we have Dazzler, who can confuse the enemy, and in a deck where we want to keep the enemy confused, that is good. We can even use Sonic Rifle for damage if we need to then. But she's also very good in the early game if you get an unlucky hand without much tech in it. You can use her, play her from Alter Ego, she'll confuse the villain, maybe 4 for 2, and it kind of gives you an extra turn to set up in a kind of solo game or help out the team in a multiplayer game, and you can keep going. Then we've got Venom, and Venom is an ally that I think surprises people when I include him, but he's really strong. If you can consistently keep the threat down to 0, which this deck definitely can in solo play, it just means he is a very consistent and quite powerful source of damage, which is particularly good when you've got lots of money to pay for him. Same as Dazzler, Iron Man definitely has the money from the mid game onwards, and Venom with Float Like a Butterfly can deal 4 damage every hit. He's got plenty of health to keep on doing that. He will just help you chew through the villain in no time at all. And I think that's really fun. And the key thing on all of these allies here on the screen is they all have an energy resource for Repulsor Blast. This deck isn't worried about Repulsor Blast as much as the other decks. It is saying, hey, I'm going to get a lot of damage from Float Like a Butterfly. I don't need my Repulsor Blast to be as efficient. That's kind of the trade-off, but you can still Repulsor Blast. And it is generally always worth it because, again, we've got this Digging Deeps, we've got that White Fox, and we still have a good amount of energy cards. Not as many as we would like, but we're probably still hitting 1, maybe 2 of them every Repulsor Blast at least, which for its cost is still making a deal good damage. And that is the final deck. That is the 3 decks we're covering in this video. We've got the Digging with Domino and Deathlock deck with, those interesting allies and leadership. Then we've got the Repurpose deck in Protection. It's just a variant of the deck that a lot of people make. It's just, all those cards make so much sense for Iron Man. And of course now Float Like a Butterfly in Justice. And I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I'll catch you in the next one. I think next time we're talking about probably She-Hulk, but maybe it'll be Black Panther. I'll see what I feel like. And we've got some more interesting videos to come up, especially for Age of Apocalypse, which is just around the corner really at this point, less than a month to go. Thank you all for watching. Please repulse blast that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.